anyone that tells you that they're an expert in generative AI before 2022, before they'd even seen ChatGPT,
Sure.
they weren't, because there's phenomenal theory around it, but in terms of applying it to real world domain expertise and use cases, that's happening right now.
Keir Regan-Alexander is an experienced architect and founder of ArcaWorks, an AI consultancy for the built environment. He spent the last 15 years designing key projects in London for a number of prominent architecture practices, including Morris and Company. Keir was an early adopter and advocate for artificial intelligence and generative design within the profession, and with ArcaWorks he is supporting architects in implementing AI tools, evolving their processes for these new and growing opportunities. What use cases are they finding for this, and how are they adapting their practices?
I talk about the work I do in two big buckets. There's images and video, and then there's text and data. And those two realms have different implications. You know that meme of like, I want AI to do the dishes, I don't want it to write poetry or whatever?
Yeah.
I think of a lot of the text work as the dishes. Maybe the image models are more like creative stuff that we'd rather do ourselves.
Sure.
If I were going into practice right now, I would be trying to find ways to become essential. But then how do you do that now? Well, it's probably different to what it was 5 years ago. So that combination of working out what's essential and also being flexible to the idea that probably the role of architect is going to change a lot and that we need to be ready for that.
So Keir, thanks for joining me. To start off, a question that I ask most of the guests: why architecture? What is it about architecture that keeps you going, keeps you coming back for more?
Oof. You can't switch it off, can you, once you have the architecture brain? So like walking into this room, I was like registering all of the finishes, all of the furniture, the various things, and the same with the building. And then while we were talking earlier, I was noticing the atrium detailing and the ring beam and all of that good stuff. So I think as soon as I got an eye for it, it's like it became a bit of an obsession.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just I like all kinds of visual things, all kinds of aesthetic things, all kinds of design, but there's something about buildings and being in them that makes you feel different. I like the idea of making things that make people feel different.
That's a really nice summary. I like that.
Is that an unusual take?
No. I think it's for me, it's an interesting one because I always have these conversations with my wife about how other people experience, space and what people see, sort of thing. Because she is in no way architectural and has, no interest in most of the things that I say. So
okay,
it's quite interesting. I always find to understand what we as architects see and how we perceive things versus the general public. And I think that's always kind of an interesting conversation and how much we as architects put into details and things like that and how much that's appreciated by people, sort of thing, and what they feel in the space. So.
Yeah. So my wife is an architect too. And so we just talk about it all the time. And unfortunately our children, I fear, are afflicted with a similar problem. So like Theo is extremely good at Minecraft and his like three-dimensional reasoning is like slightly worryingly, I fear for him a little bit, but we'll see. Don't know if I'll be encouraging it or dissuading it. We'll see.
So just with that in mind, what was your kind of early, idea into architecture? Why did you get into it? Are there any sort of early memories or early experiences that kind of pushed you that way?
I do remember being taken to certain places by my dad in particular, because he used to take me to kind of cultural places like galleries or theatres and things. And I remember feeling different in those sorts of buildings. I didn't really think I didn't consider it was for me. I was sort of into music and art, and then I did quite well at science at school. And then my dad, who's a doctor, sort of said, you should be a doctor. And so that was my plan for a couple of years. And then I wasn't very good at chemistry. And I don't think my heart was in the idea either. And then I remember my sister saying in the car one day, she wanted to be an architect, and I didn't really know what it was. And then she said, like Tom Selleck from 3 Men and a Baby.
Brilliant.
And I was like, oh yeah, that does seem like a cool job. And then my career advisor said something similar. He's looking at what I was good at. I was very into graphic design as well and things like that. And then because I did all science at A-level, I got into engineering. And then I had a second thoughts about that, and I took a gap year. And then in the gap year, I basically decided I'm just going for architecture. So I went around the schools. My mum came to all the schools with me, and I didn't look back, to be honest. I felt like once I got into undergrad, it was like the first time I was doing a subject that was designed for me. as in I felt finally like all of the other subjects I'd done, there was somewhat a match, but then with architecture, it felt like there was fully a match. I was really obsessed with it. And it was, a total pleasure to study and to do.
And I know you went, you did your part 1 at Liverpool and then your part 2 at Westminster.
That's right, yeah.
What was the difference between those experiences? I know you mentioned previously when we were speaking about the appreciation of the studio space at Liverpool, for example.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of an interesting thing when you jump between part 1 and part 2 and those sort of experiences.
Yeah, so Liverpool was, I think, quite traditional in the sense of we did a lot of like technical theory, we did a lot of history of architecture. I had an amazing professor, David Dunster, and he was very inspirational. Like we studied the modernist, there was a real sort of rigor to it. When I went to Westminster, it was way more experimental, and that was what I wanted.
Yeah.
So I think I got a good balance of quite good technical background at Liverpool. It very much looked and felt like I thought an architecture education should. The studios, culture, drawing boards, making models, fantastic. And great friends there as well. And then at Westminster, I'd done my part 1 in London, and I wanted to go to a London school. I wanted that. They're much more avant-garde, actually, in terms of design culture, I think. I mean, at that time, I think like the President's Medals were being won at that school, and it was wild. Like we had 6 or 7 studios. The studios all had very different remits and different styles, and you could be postmodern for a year, and then you could go parametric, and they had every kind of design school in a way in that school.
Yeah, microcosm sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So you sort of picked your tribe, and I was in Gene Sillett's unit there, and I would say it was very place-based, history-based, deep research, phenomenological, very much about atmosphere and like the tectonic feeling of spaces. And we did one project, the whole year was one project.
Yeah.
And then the whole year of 5th year was one project practically. And it was great. They were both brilliant for different reasons. I'm quite glad I got a mix and didn't do I actually went back to Liverpool, and I remember David Dunster was there, and he saw me in reception. He was like, "What the F are you doing here?" As in, he was like, "You need to go do something else."
Yeah.
And it was such good advice because I wanted to go back and work with him again. And his advice was, no, challenges, like, as not that it wouldn't have been a challenge, it was more like, do something different. You've got an opportunity here. He actually told me to go to Switzerland, and I did get a place, and I found out too late. And anyway, I'm very glad I went to Westminster. It was good.
I think that is the fascinating thing, isn't it? Like the older you get, the more you kind of reminisce and think about the sort of early days of when those experimentation things can happen, and all the different opportunities that. Yeah, I mean, the amount of people that I talk to about pushing them into different things when you are in that sort of early career, point of just trying everything, and no experience is kind of negative. It's just about getting a different type of experience in architecture.
Yeah.
With that sort of in mind, your early career was at AHMM and Field and Fowles. Yeah. Obviously quite two very well-known and very well-regarded practices, but two very different sizes and work, types of work. I wonder if we could just spend a little time just kind of looking at the differences between those two and your differences in their sort of experiences.
I had at HMM something of a baptism of fire. I went in part 1. I was definitely the youngest in the whole practice. I think there were 2 part 1s that year. I'm still friends with James, who was the other part 1. It was HMM very much that time was like, I think there were 75 when I joined, and then quickly it was 100, and it was a time of great growth. It was incredibly exciting, and they put me on this amazing office building. It's called the Yellow Building in Latimer Road. It was Monsoon Accessorize's headquarters, and they were topping out when I joined, and I basically got to work on it on site. I did doing various packages, package information, subcontractor information, like all that real nitty gritty. I just went straight in for it. And it was just brilliant. And then I think my takeaway from working with AHMM is that they are such a well-run machine. Like it's such an effective design practice. And they have, at that time, like my big impression, and it's still true, is there was a sort of system for everything. Like they'd worked it out. They were obsessed with like taking something that they did well and then making sure they didn't forget that in the future. So everything you did was exemplary, as in you would try. I mean, and I had a very good project architect called Sarah, and she was obsessive about detail and really used to pick me up on stuff and redline things. And, you know, immediately you have to really be on it. So I think the thing I got from HMM was like really good background in sort of thinking about the best way to do things in practice and systems and making sure things get better over time.
Sure.
And I'm still obsessed with that now. And that's sort of a lot of what I do now is systems thinking with practices, working out, okay, your practice is an engine. Like, how do you make sure it's running well? How do you change something and make it run better? That's very much what I'm doing now. And then with Field and Fowles, I wanted to do something very different from HMM. And they were great. I worked at HMM through my part 2. They were very supportive, and I'm still good friends with them. And my wife works there still now. Field and Fowles, I knew Fergus, personal friend, and I was very excited by what they did. They did T-Pren, and it was, very early days. Like we were in this like very cold warehouse, freezing cold warehouse in Hackney, and he let me come in and do a couple of things, and then they hired me as a part 2. And at that time, we didn't have a part 3 in the whole practice. We were all part 2s.
Yeah, incredibly young practice, wasn't it?
So young, yeah. Because they just had that attitude of like, just do it. We'll work it out. It'd be fine. And it was. It wasn't without risk and so without stress. It was very, very much. It was very stressful and hard work. But because I went in to a small practice, you become, it's just everything. You have to do everything, and you become quite essential quite fast. And then I was able to get projects which were way really beyond my years, and thankfully managed to deliver them well. And so I did my part 3 there, and then there was just something about the kind of just got to get on with it and do it all, and we'll work it out and we'll make it work. And the work was very high quality, and it's continued to be high quality. And actually I always joke that like the best thing that happened to Field and Fowles was me leaving, because they've just gone from strength to strength ever since. Fabulous practice.
Yeah. I mean, it's even in just 2 experiences, it's just such a variety of, like you say, experiences and responsibilities and things like that. When obviously your next move is Doug and Morris, or now Morris and Company. I mean, obviously the kind of interesting thing is Joe is ex AHMM. Yeah. And at the time they were probably, quite a young practice as well. Yeah. So it feels like, the Field and Fowles and the HMM together made a Doug and Morris sort of thing. And I wonder what that sort of experience then going into that practice. And I know on your CV you talk about being employee number 20. Yeah. And, leaving that practice 10 years later as a director. Yeah. So
it was a great experience. Yes, it was very much. So I did big, then I did small, and then I guess medium. I don't know what it was. 20 is sort of small to medium, isn't it? Yeah. And then by the time I left, we were practicing up at like 50 or 60 ish kind of range. So so I do think Joe and I worked well immediately together because probably because we had that shared history of HMM. Like I think immediately he kind of like, I recognized the filing system when I went in,
Brilliant.
And so like we, in those days we were MicroStation as well. It was, it was dreamy. And so you just sort of, it felt like, and we had a lot of like shared staff members. I don't know, it just felt like very familiar. And he, at that point at 20, they were starting to go from they'd done lots of like private houses, lovely small jobs and got a lot of recognition. And then now they were starting to be courted by bigger clients, PLCs and bigger organizations. And you needed that sort of understanding of what it meant to work at more of a commercial scale and with larger clients and with more risk. And so I think I came in and I was given attended to work on the bigger jobs, I would say, in the earlier in my early days there. And the first project I did it was delivered last year. I mean, it took 10 years to build practically.
That's architecture.
That's the way it goes. Yeah. Yeah. So it was a good blend. And I mean, in terms of advice to sort of younger architects, I do think it's good to have a sense of there are different types of practice and they have very different cultures, and it's good to just understand what they're all about. And I wanted to be part of something that was changing and fast.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Like at Field and Fowles, I mean, I left like, you know, with very, very fondly. But I basically I'd seen Doug Morris's Ortus building in Denmark Hill, and I was like, oh man, I just have to go work with that practice. I really wanted to go work with them. And because I had the feeling that they were just going to go on and like suddenly sort of kick on to the next level. And I wanted to be part of something where that feeling of like rapid sort of growth, I suppose, and experience. And that was a good decision.
Yeah. I mean, it does feel like they're one of those practices of that generation that have been able to sort of navigate the commercial aspect whilst retaining that sort of design quality that really, you know, stays with the projects, I suppose. I mean, obviously they went through their sort of difficult period and you know, the breaking up of the band sort of thing. And obviously that as an individual and as a person in that company, that must have been a really kind of strange thing to experience and navigate, I suppose.
Yeah, it was really stressful. It was really, really difficult period for everyone involved. Joe and Mary, and like, you know, I was in, me, David, Miranda, and Charlotte at the time, co-directors, and we were tasked with, I suppose, helping the practice through that period and sort of navigating it and making sure that it was quite a disruptive time for obvious reasons. Sure. And it was a lot of difficult meetings, frankly. And but you know, we came through it, and it was everyone came through it. And it's just stuff like that happens in practice. It's not always a walk in a park, you know. And you've just got to always be like, we had that sort of like, well, okay, what's next, and you just keep working through it. And then we came out on the other side. Mary came out with a great practice. She's done wonderful work. And, you know, we're still all in touch. And I think probably it was, you know, with the benefit of hindsight, the practices went in different directions. Like you can see what Mary's done. And Joe and the stuff that we did with Joe afterwards, it's sort of, I think it was the founding of Morris & Company, which I was sort of pivotal in, along with the others. It was a repositioning and sort of, we were trying to be clear about the sort of work we wanted to do and the way we wanted to do it, basically. And it was an interesting time for sure.
And was the point of, I mean, obviously with the naming of the company, Morris & Company sort of thing, and opening that up to a sort of, you know, was the intention was that it became more about the open table with the rest of the directors, I suppose?
Yeah. So the and company thing was a big deal.
Yeah.
We actually talked. It was the last idea we had. So there was I won't name the other names that we had. There were some funny ones.
Yeah.
Some ones I'm really glad we didn't do. We were called something else for a few weeks. I definitely won't say that. But we were trying to not do a name.
Yeah.
And then I think Miranda said, hang on a sec, like, what are we doing? Like, there's a reason. Doug and Morris has
a value.
I remember she used the word cachet and there's a reputation there. And people do come to us because of Joe. And so the thing was like, okay, Joe is the sort of spiritual leader of it, and then we're the company, and it was very much about shared voices and trying to very much share the culture of leadership across the practice.
What were the sort of values that, you know, you as a director really tried to sort of hone in your role and amongst your sort of staff, and the sort of, you know, the values you tried to push amongst your people to get the best out of that?
I have a thing which is what you do is more important than what you say. So I think the way turning up and like leading by example is important. So if things go wrong, like how do you take responsibility for them yourself rather than, you know, blaming other people? I think another thing, like I definitely made mistakes earlier on when I got to the point where I was maybe overseeing other people or starting to run projects where I definitely micromanaged people and made them, you know, I could see it was not an effective approach, and it was coming out of probably, it was when you're stressed, that's what you end up doing.
Of course. Yeah.
And if you've not understood how to do it properly, like that's the first major error that people make when they reach more management or senior level or leadership level, is they think they have to control every detail, and they try and they end up micromanaging. I mean, you'd have to ask my teams, but I don't think I did that. I was very much always about like, I just trusting. We had amazing talent, talented people there. So just trusting people, and being available if they needed support. I think so. Yeah. Having a culture of like doing, not saying, I think is important. And I genuinely just really liked all the teams that I worked with. We were lucky to have amazingly talented people. So it does make it a lot easier.
Yeah.
When that's,
yes.
So
eventually you leave Morris and Company.
Yeah.
Onto
different things,
let's say. Was it, well, I suppose we'll come on to the sort of incredibly exciting AI stuff and consultancy and software, but
yeah,
the thing I'm kind of interested in, what was it that allowed you to have your kind of finger on the pulse with that and take that kind of opportunity? Because it's something that, so many of us are trying to grapple with.
Yeah.
And I suppose, what is it that you saw as probably an early adopter to, those sorts of things, those sorts of conversations, those sorts of rumblings that made you kind of, stop and, stop practicing as a architect and jump into this kind of new field?
In my family, I've got people that are in tech and people that are in AI. And so we've been talking about it for about over a decade, about what it would all mean. And I kept thinking, when's this going to come to architecture? When's it going to start impacting us? And I would say 2022 was the year when we saw that really happen. And I'd spent probably the 5 years before that, if I had sort of, if you could describe them as side hustles, I'm not sure, but like hobbies or whatever it was, all the hobbies were around tech and software. So I was doing sort of evening classes in Python and product management, and listening to and reading about tech entrepreneurs, and just getting kind of just following my nose down that rabbit hole. Like I'm quite an obsessive character, and I was kind of a bit obsessed in that realm. And I did sort of several things beforehand. Like I had this, I did a thing with a family member on like algorithmic trading, like high frequency trading with using Python to do that. And then I did another, which was like a statistical method to predict the next Michelin star restaurants in London. Like, so I was like constantly coming up with these things. Then we did a passive house retrofit, passive house tool. I did that with two other guys, one of whom's gone on to found, he's got a startup that's doing that. So there were rumblings. People talk about finding your niche. And my brother-in-law had said to me around the time we were tricking around with things together, well, your niche must be architecture plus like software and tech or whatever. And I was like, oh, gross, that sounds awful. And I just couldn't really see what that would look like. Yeah, sure. And because then I was like prop tech, like not really interested in prop tech per se. And then in 2022, me and Matteo, who's the BIM manager at Morris & Company, we were looking at a thing called Delve, which is originally Google owned product, and it's like a master planning generative design tool. And we'd gotten a trial for it, and I remember two things. So the first thing was it didn't really work. It wasn't robust. It didn't at all do what I wanted, and I was annoyed that I felt like the people who designed it hadn't really understood the anatomy of buildings and of places, and everything was numerical. It'd been turned into a statistical assessment, and I felt that was very utilitarian and not really what the world needed. The other thing was they were pricing it very highly, so it was a sort of full-time salary type of price, and I just thought, I kind of came away from that experience thinking, okay, that feels like quite important as a moment. And then I went home, and it was like, so it didn't really work, but then it also did. I was impressed. I was very impressed. I was like, oh wow. And then I just thought, we'll give this 5 years. This is going to be a huge thing. And maybe it won't be that product. I'm sure it'll be other things. And I suddenly started to think, I think we should be. I don't understand where the architects are in this. Like, And I went on their website and I started looking at the job section. And so and then I realized I'm thinking, I'd quite like to work on this product. And that's a strange thing to think if you're a director in a company.
Yeah.
And I was doing literally my dream role. I had a directorship in a great design practice, as delivering projects. We probably finished 5 or 6 projects that I'd been, pivotal in my last year. And I'm going online, like seeing if I can get a job in like New York at this tech company, which is ridiculous. But it was a bit of a signal. And then very, very soon after that, the first release of ChatGPT happened. And because we'd had this narrative and discussions for so long, I was like on the first day logging in, using it. And DALL-E was happening around that time as well. And I guess I sort of looked at it, and I've had a few things in life where, when you get these nudges and you see things and then you ignore it. And then 2 years later, you see it again and you ignore it. And then a couple of years later, it's like a huge thing.
Sure.
And you just think, why didn't I just act on the first impulse? And then I started playing in my head, well, what would that look like if I just acted on this impulse that I have? Like, I'm spending all my time on this. Why don't I do this? And, so I think I was also at a moment in Morris & Company where I'd finished, my major projects were coming to a close. And I was looking not at the next year or 2 years, I was looking at the next 10 years. And we were also at a point as a sort of leadership team where, we were looking at very longer term plans in terms of, sharing company and all that other good stuff.
So it was all in.
It was all in. It was like, basically see you at retirement or do something else. And I just decided to, I think I said something like, I'm not sure if this is the fish I'm going to catch. I think I need to go catch a different one, which is mental actually in hindsight. And it really does feel still a bit mental, but it's been an amazing pleasure, the whole thing since then. And thankfully it's worked out. And if it hadn't worked out, I probably would have just, gone and tried to get a job again and carried on being just a traditional architect.
No bad thing.
So and then it's interesting, once you when you work on something full time, you get, quite good and quite obsessed with it quite fast. And then the other thing I think about this whole space is that really anyone that tells you that they're an expert in generative AI before 2022, before they'd even seen ChatGPT, they weren't, because there's phenomenal theory around it, but in terms of applying it to real world domain expertise and use cases, that's happening right now. And we're 2 or 3 years in, basically.
So with that in mind, obviously, your company ArcWorks, your consultancy, you work with other architects, other practices, navigating this whole thing. What is the industry, how are the people that you're working with, what use cases are they finding for this? And I suppose, how are they adapting their practices to these things? And I suppose at a time when so many of us feel like, we want to get on this train and we don't want to miss it, sort of thing. I guess it's kind of like understanding what those opportunities are.
So I talk about the work I do in 2 big buckets. There's images and video. That's one bucket. And then there's text and data. And for the images and video, we're talking about diffusion models mostly, things like Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, Flux. In the text world, we're talking about large language models, essentially. And those 2 realms have different implications for practice. So the image realm is, I guess there's that, that meme of like, I want AI to do the dishes, I don't want it to write poetry or whatever. I suppose I think of a lot of the text work as the dishes. It's more the administrative supportive tasks, project support tasks. And maybe the image models are more like the not dishes, whatever that is, the creative stuff that we'd rather do ourselves. What I find is every practice falls in a different place. So some people want to do everything, and they are all in on, let's change the way we process all written information in the practice, and also at the same time, let's like completely revolutionize our design process. And it does go to the core of your design culture if you want to do it. And then other practices, I'm very lucky to work with a lot of amazing practices with, international reputations, where they are more circumspect, particularly about the design side, and which I completely understand. And that's kind of one of the reasons I set up ArcWorks, which is I could see this thing was going to go straight to the core of our practice culture. And they are not really, some of those are just saying, we're just not going to touch image models because we don't really want really want to bring AI into that part of our world, but we'd love to have help with,
the stuff we don't enjoy.
The stuff we don't enjoy. And the stuff we don't enjoy would include things like regulatory audits, briefing trackers, meeting minutes, condition trackers, all kinds of administrative project management tools, which are hugely aided now if you can learn how to do it in the right way by the use of these phenomenal, particularly the latest reasoning models that are coming out. If you use them in the right way with the right setup, and you know how to avoid certain risks, they are astoundingly effective. And every day I'm shocked by what I see is possible. And one of the reasons I love doing workshops and meeting lots of different practices is in every single workshop, someone comes up with a different thought and they'll say, oh, could I try this? I've just been trying to do this on a project. Use case, sort of. And suddenly you're taking something that exists in the world, technology, and you're actually applying it to a domain and you're applying your expertise and you know your field. So I know I understand the risks of being on an architecture project. I understand the sort of imperatives and the stresses of it, and also the opportunities. So your job then is, how do I take this thing that's out there and fit it into that world in a way that's actually not a pain in the arse and actually something that people are so grateful for. So when it's working well, people genuinely, you get texts like people just saying, oh my God, this is unbelievable. I'm so delighted with this thing. Or they're really happy to show you something that they made. Yeah. And so that's what I'm seeing. I think I talk about heat map, an AI heat map for every organization. And the idea is that your particular sensitivity to this technology depends on the culture of your practice and how you operate already. So, and so you can look at a practice and you can say, where are the opportunities? Where do we want to be really aggressive and where do we want to be more circumspect? And what will emerge is a picture of opportunities. And I call it a heat map. And essentially you just there's a way of looking at it, analyzing what you'd like to do first, and you just go straight into those things. And you have quite a sort of objective way of saying, well, there's 100 things we could do, but what are the 5 things we should do in the next 6 months or so? And you just work at it like that, basically.
So with the pressures of the industry, and we all know this idea of racing to the bottom in terms of our fees and our value, do you see the AI opportunity as an option for efficiency and, the idea of tackling these problems? Or I suppose with the rest of the world, speeding along on that same thing, are we just going to be in the same position that we were all along?
I wrote something last year, which was, we need to talk about fees. And we do need to talk about fees in general, like outside of AI. I don't like talking about, I find the word efficiency slightly crude when we talk about AI because it's so one-dimensional. I think I want practices to become more effective. Yeah. And I also want to make sure that any benefits that they get, that they actually feel themselves and that they don't just pass them back to the market, because I think we've been giving value away to the market for too long. I'm worried I'm particularly worried about the idea of time saving if we are moving our fee structures to a time standard, time-based standard. In the 15 years or so since I sort of did my part 2, the culture of fees has shifted from percentage-based, value-based fees to lump sum fees derived from resource plans. And unfortunately, those are usually underestimated. And I see that as being a major problem for undercutting as well. And the problem with that is if you make a time saving and you use it as a competitive measure against another practice, then what you will do is you will drive our fees into the ground. And that's how we lose at this whole thing. But we are uniquely positioned to discharge the responsibilities and duties of architects, particularly with the Building Safety Act. We are essential. I still believe that. We need to understand our value, and with the rise of AI, we need to be the best at using it, and we need to not become at risk from some product that pops up that promises to do what we do. Yeah, we should be better. We should be way better at that at any product than that, and we should be paid well for it. And so, I sort of push back. I try not to talk about time saving. Of course, there is time saving involved. If you're doing it the right way, you should find the quality goes up. and you should also find that your enjoyment of the tasks way goes up. So you get great pleasure and satisfaction when from say sitting in a meet. The big one that I'm enjoying at the moment is transcriptions are just so phenomenal. And there's ways of taking transcriptions in person that recognizes different voices. So you know who's speaking and when, and taking those and basically producing your written records, your reports, updating trackers, doing all kinds of things with that raw material. So the meeting becomes incredibly important, and what you say in the meeting is consequential. So you're more declarative when you're communicating. You start making sure, okay, so what's the action and what have we decided or what didn't we agree? And you start saying these things out loud because you know it's going to get picked up and it's going to end up in the tracker, it's going to end up in the minutes, or it's going to end up in the planning statement or whatever it is that this thing's getting put into. And that means that you work better because you have better meeting hygiene, you have better communication.
Yeah. What a fascinating feedback loop to say that we're changing our behavior because of that.
Oh yeah, we definitely will do. Yeah,
really
I mean, I'm seeing it already, and I actually in that case, I think it's a positive change.
Yeah, completely.
There is an interesting sort of counterbalance to that, which is if an AI is listening, then we could be on the hook for all kinds of things in terms of indemnity. So, and if you're a cynical project manager or contractor, then you might want to use transcriptions, and I know that they're already thinking about doing this essentially to pursue architects and make claims more effectively. So maybe what happens is the culture of meetings, technical meetings, become extremely they're just procedural, and no one says anything of any consequence. And then what happens is I'll take that away, is what people say. I'll just have to confirm that, and of course the real conversation happens somewhere else.
Sure.
So we'll see.
With the whole changing attitudes around AI and how practices are using it, I wonder if we talk about your sort of new startup, OmniChat.
Yeah.
If you can give me a kind of a brief intro into what the origins of that are and why you decided to go down that route.
Yeah, I mean, I'm incredibly excited about it. So I met Stephen, who's my co-founder, on an AI panel at Arup, an event, and we sort of clicked. We immediately went looking for Innovate UK funding for a project. Sure. We didn't actually get the funding, right. But it's interesting. The idea we had, or that really Stephen had, I shouldn't take credit for it, is what we're going to probably be implementing in the next year or so. And that's a more agentic approach to an API-based agentic approach to building different automated workflows for practices. But he sort of said to me, we're working in a similar space. So he's software development background, right. AI specialist, and he's working with some practices I know. And he said to me, "What's like your biggest challenge at the moment?" And I said, I think there's huge potential in large language models, but I'm worried about privacy, right. And I'm worried about access, because what I see is the private tools you have to pay for. When I say privacy, I mean protection from training. You still have to trust third parties. These are not private, like airlocked LLMs, but you're at the moment if you do a survey in a practice, you will find more than 50% of people are using free ChatGPT. And they are just giving all the data away for training. So they're making the models better. All of the stuff that you put into ChatGPT, all the attachments, whether you own them or not, and you probably don't own a lot of them, probably they belong to other people, you're giving them away. They might be confidential. They might be GDPR sensitive. And, there's a data issue there. There's also, there's a quality issue. I did a test last week. Just the way you prompt will massively change accuracy. Sure. So if you drop an attachment into free ChatGPT, if you drop the EU Act into free ChatGPT and you ask it to retrieve all of the articles, it gets about 4% accuracy, which is shocking. If you do the same in GPT Team using attachment method, you get about 16%. It gets a few of the articles, doesn't do a good enough job. But if you do this method we endorse called unabridged prompting, you get it retrieves every single article 100% accurate. And that's using the same model. It's just interacting with it in a different way. So I was talking to Stephen about this, and he said, well, I've got this prototype. And basically, as soon as I saw it, I said, this is what everyone needs. So we implemented it first for a big practice in London. And now it's the main tool I use for all of my training. And the main idea is we've got all of the language models that we think are any good connected up inside it. Okay. So it's one interface that you learn. and you can flip the models at any point. So you can do work in Claude, and then you can have GPT come in and check the homework of Claude and see how it did. Is it accurate? Did it make any mistakes? And then you could maybe use a different model for data analytics or whatever. So you sort of have configurations set up for different tasks, and you get to know, when you get very into it, you get to know which ones are good at what.
Right.
And they have different personalities. They're sort of like your team, and you have to decide who in your team you'd like to pick for a certain task. So I think of GPT-4o as like a very, almost like an engineer. It's like very sort of analytical, very quite utilitarian. Whereas Claude, the Claude personality is much more able to handle nuance and to deal with uncertainty, and to use and to adopt style of language. So you would use those two types of characters for different things. So that's why it's called OmniChat, because we have these Omni models basically.
Right. Sure.
So it's multimodal.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that it's allowed us to do is to standardize workflows. So when we're working with practices, I'll build them a solution for, I don't know, basically taking something from one position into another position and outputting material that's essentially usable. And we set those up as pre-made templates. So you just click a button and they run. And yeah, we're starting now to implement agents. I don't know if you want to talk about agents, but agents can do sort of end-to-end tasks now, and link different tools up with APIs. So that's also going to sit in Omni. So that's becoming extremely busy. We've got clients in Denmark, Ireland, Germany, and the UK. And
so that's almost like having a staff member that will go and do a task for you and put the pieces together.
It's exactly, you still have to. So what I like to encourage is that people learn to prompt really well, and then they essentially have a suite of workflows that they've built themselves using this method.
Right.
And it'll be like, it might be quite a big job that the thing does, or it might just be a small section of a job that you do regularly, but it just really helps you with that part of it. And rather than doing it in this ad hoc way, I describe it like what most people do with GPT is they kind of open the fridge and decide what to cook for dinner. And it's like, oh, I've got this and this, and I'll just throw them together.
Sure.
With this method, it's much more like you've got a recipe and it executes the same, and you're just changing the ingredients each time a little bit. So there's a couple of things that change, but most of it stays the same. And so you're looking around the practice constantly for like, what are these things we do all the time that actually, yeah, they're different, but there is a structure, there is a template, there is a method that we follow. Those things are perfect for this. So I think we worked out there's something like 80 typical, there's about 80 things you can do across a whole practice. And that's just as a starting point that we've started to do. And so a lot of what we do is that, and that's becoming more and more of my efforts and focus. And it's also made me become way more specialized on large language models, because I'm working with Stephen, and Stephen reads every single research paper. Every new model release, he's trying it on the day, and we're able to connect new models very quickly. And that whole process of working with Stephen has been just the most amazing education for me as well. And a lot of my clients benefit from that directly. So yeah, I probably, in terms of where I see opportunity, I love the image realm. I find it kind of interests a different part of my brain. It activates the sort of the part of the brain that you enjoy using for sketching and that sort of part. But the thing I think is really transformative is probably the language models work. Yeah.
I think just sitting here, listening to you talking about the processes and understanding the different processes, an architecture practice goes into, I am thinking about those early days at AHMM that you're talking about with the systems and stuff. And
that's right.
I think it's a really fascinating thing to, go full circle with that, and you to be looking at new technologies, but solving the same problems that you were thinking about.
I like that you closed that loop, because I think that is about right. Actually, I think there's a method of thinking about businesses as systems, and that within a system, if you can observe it objectively and say, can you describe it to someone else? Like, how do we do bids? Can you describe it? Or is it totally made up every time? If you can't describe it, it's not a system, and you need to be able to draw it. And then you need to say, okay, well, there's 10 parts to that process or 20 parts to it. Whatever it is that you're doing, like maybe you're bidding for awards or whatever it is, you could probably describe it and draw that process. And then you can become obsessed about improving the system. And then it's almost like you're constantly refining this overall vehicle or engine or whatever the right metaphor is. That's how I think about practice. And I think maybe it did come from HMM, or maybe it's just the way I tend to think about problems. I don't know.
With that in mind, just to kind of close up the conversation, what do you think people can kind of take away from your career journey, considering that, like we've just kind of alluded to, you've kind of gone, you've gone full circle but now are, incredibly sort of future looking and trying to solve age old problems, but in a clearly sort of contemporary manner. What is, if you're a young architect starting in practice, or even you're a young person starting into architecture, what is that journey going to be looking like in the future, and what are those sort of takeaways that we can get from your journey, I suppose?
I find this a bit hard, actually. I find it really hard to think about the future right now in terms of career advice for other people. But I think maybe what we can be sure of is there's going to be lots more change. And I think there's maybe a way of thinking about your career in a more flexible way. I've probably had a problem with the title architect for some time.
Okay.
As in, I'm very proud of the fact I'm an architect, but it's also, it's something of a straitjacket because there is a certain way that we think about what we must do each day and how we must do it. And it's not, I don't know I think that sort of, I'm an architect and that's my ego, and I define myself in that way. Sure. I find that to be limiting and not ready for what needs to be much more flexible approach. So I think the skill set for architecture is phenomenal. What we're really good is like quite abstract problem solving. Like we're taking very complex things and weaving an answer, and also communicating that story from beginning to end to clients. And those sorts of skills are universal, and those are the things, they're not going to be alienated from us. Like if we can communicate with clients, connect, understand their problems, find solutions to them. Building is incredibly stressful. Also, it happens in the real world, like with muddy holes and people digging stuff on site. Like it's a messy business, and we need to lean into that sort of those parts if we want to make in terms of AI and disruption. That's where we bring value, I think, is the ability to come in and see the problem, identify it, and be able to weave a solution, and then communicate the solution. And then we're almost like producers rather than like artists. Like we part producer, part director or something, and we're building a vision, and we need to bring people in at the right time. But I also think like, that we've got this thing where maybe it's our training, but we sort of feel like we need to be like the best. We have to be total like all rounders at everything. And I also think that's a bit of a problem. So just in terms of, if I were going into practice right now, I would be trying to find ways to become essential. And I think that's probably true of any time in human history. If you want to do well, you basically have to work out in any situation, how do I become essential and indispensable? And that's true now. But then how do you do that now? Well, it's probably different to what it was 5 years ago. And I think, so that combination of working out what's essential and also being flexible to the idea that probably the role of architect is going to change a lot, and that we need to be ready for that in order to have a flourishing and happy career, and not be too rigid about, like, I don't know if you have the same thing. I have this sort of monograph. My joke is like, in my head I have a monograph, and it's like the like career architect name on a book. Here's my portfolio. Sure. I've delivered these projects. Aren't they amazing? Plan sections, elevations. And who am I trying to impress? Like mostly other architects. Like that's all of the things I just said. Most architects that I know, I think, are vulnerable to that fantasy. Yeah. And I definitely am. But it doesn't serve us well. And it's very limiting, because actually there's all kinds of other opportunities. If you just say, well, how can I be essential and where can I provide value? So like maybe my thing is, when you're looking at your next business opportunity or your next move, it's like, you could think, well, what do I want for myself? Or you can think, and in my situation, I probably would have come away from Morrison Company thinking, oh, I should set up a practice and set up my own practice, architecture practice. Maybe it's AI driven. And then I thought to myself, I'm not sure we need another practice right now. And it feels like there's a lot of really good practices. So what maybe the world needs is for me, or what I could do that would actually be more valuable, is go help focus my time on becoming really good at something, and then go help lots of other practices with that. And that's a different way of looking at a problem, is like, rather than what am I trying to impose on it? It's like, well, where could I be valuable? So I would say that to young up and coming architects.
Yeah,
but I do think it's a funny time, and I'm slightly, I don't know. What do you think about the future of what would you be saying to architects coming up now? I mean, you're seeing all this stuff too.
Yeah. I mean, like you say, it's something that we're all trying to navigate. And I think it's an incredibly difficult time. And particularly, even just choosing to study architecture at the moment is such a big, decision to make and things like that. So yeah, it's just complicated, isn't it?
It's a huge undertaking, financially
massive
crazy.
Undertaking.
It doesn't make any financial sense anymore. And that's something that's changed in my career. I went to the Arsenal last night, and I met up with a friend from Part One, and he went and did contracting.
Yeah.
And lots of my friends actually have ended up going and doing different things later in their careers. But we were reflecting on our starting salaries at Part One, and how proud we were. And we look at the numbers now, and they're not that different.
Yeah.
And yet we know everything costs about 10 times more. So I find that to be incredibly unjust and upsetting for up and coming architects. They need to be angrier about it as well. Like, it's not acceptable. And I think the slight problem, I mean, it's fee driven. I mean, practices are not making enough fees, they're not making enough profit. I think there's maybe a sense of, I don't know that those things are felt by incumbent owners and leaders of practices when they've been running them for many years, maybe many decades, and they are fairly well off, and they're probably doing it for the pleasure of doing it, and it's less essential for them. And I think that got worse during COVID, in terms of the disparity of perspective. And it's a difficult time. We need to sort it out. I don't know how we sort it out. It would really help if our professional institutions were more direct on this and took a lead. I think they've been a bit agnostic about it for too long. And I think, I don't know what happens. I mean, basically the only logic at the moment, you need to be pretty privileged, I think, to look at the economic equation for architecture and think that it makes any sense at all. And I'm probably lucky to have come from, I had, like, my parents were always like, do what you love, and which was lovely, but that's like generational advice. I'm not sure that's so appropriate anymore. In a way, it's like it's that might be quite an irrational thing to do now.
Completely, and particularly given now the government is talking about moving the apprenticeship schemes away, the funding away from apprenticeship schemes, which again was quite a hopeful thing for. Obviously, it was never going to solve the problem, but it was a hopeful kind of thing. So it's a difficult time, and I don't think anyone's quite got the answers. But like you say, at least our professional bodies pushing and having those conversations might help.
They really need to. Yeah.
Brilliant. Keir, absolutely fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. It was very fun.